President Trump traveling later this month for his first trip overseas as commander-in-chief. The president's trip will start in Saudi Arabia, then proceed to Israel, the Vatican, Brussels, and Sicily. The trip is designed to show resolve to top U.S. allies, according to White House officials. Joining me right now in her first business interview is former Secretary of State under President George W. Bush and author of the new book, Democracy, Stories from the Long Road to Freedom. Condoleezza Rice is with us. Dr. Rice, great to see you.
Pleasure to see you, too.
Thank you so much for joining us, and congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
And you certainly can talk about this long road to freedom, having grown up in one area where your parents knew better and really guided your path. Isn't that right?
Well, I absolutely thank the Lord for my parents, because raising a kid in segregated Birmingham, Alabama, where horizons could have been extremely limited, but my parents, who were educators, believed in faith, family, and education, and that anything was possible. And they thought anything was possible with American democracy, even though it was a tough time if you were black in Birmingham.
And you lived it out.
Yes.
That's for sure. Going from academic, Professor Rice, to Secretary of State. I want to get into the book coming up. But first, let me get your thoughts on the president's first trip overseas as president. His first trip overseas has been to Canada or Mexico, typically, yes, in the past. But he's choosing the Middle East.
He's choosing the Middle East. I think he feels that he wants to shore up some relationships there. It's been a rough time for our allies in the Gulf. They believe that the Iranian nuclear deal, whatever its merits, had pushed us toward Iran and away from our traditional allies like Saudi Arabia. Of course, the Israelis also worry about Iran, and so I think it's a good thing to do, to go and shore up those allies. It's also the center of the place that we're going to have to deal with extremism. The Saudis are leaders in the Arab world, and getting a push from leaders in the Arab world to help to deal with extremism and the ideology, not just the military piece of it, but the ideology. This is an important trip, an important set of issues that he's going to raise.
And even when the president was first elected, it was the King of Saudi Arabia that actually came out and supported President Trump, even though there was a lot of conversation around the president's travel ban and what it meant for Muslims.
And I think you also see that the Deputy Crown Prince, who is leading the reform of Saudi Arabia, was here, had extensive meetings in the White House, and apparently those went very well. So it's not a bad thing to shore up relations with your allies, and then he'll go on to some more traditional places like Brussels to meet with our NATO allies.
Let me ask you about Russia, because Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is set to host Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov tomorrow. The two are expected to talk about the conflicts in Syria and the Ukraine, and this is going to be the Russian envoy's first visit to Washington since 2013. Yes. What are your expectations here amid all of this conversation around Russia and the potential of collusion, which is what the media has been going with so much?
Well, despite the difficulties that we have with Russia, leave aside what is happening in terms of Washington and the discussion of Russians and our election. You know, we have problems with Russia and Ukraine. We have problems with Russia threatening our allies. We have problems with the parent reports that the Russians are now supporting or arming the Taliban in Afghanistan. And so with that backdrop, it's really important to get together with the Russian foreign minister to send strong messages about what's acceptable and what isn't. But I suspect they also will try to figure out whether there's a way forward on Syria. The fact is that when the Russians decided to use military force there, they gave themselves leverage that we don't have, having decided not to do that. And so the road to peace is unfortunately going to have to include Moscow and their interest, and so I'm sure that's part of the story. And I also hope that they will discuss North Korea, because while we have a lot of differences with the Russians, I have to believe that one similarity is that nobody wants a reckless North Korean leader with long-range nuclear missiles, nuclear-armed missiles. If you can reach Alaska, you can reach Vladivostok.
Yeah, I don't want to ask you about North Korea, but you have a chapter on Russia in the book. What should Donald Trump know about Russia? I mean, you've dealt with them over the years many times and really understand the Russians very well. What doesn't this administration know that needs to understand better?
Well, I think they're finding out because Vladimir Putin and the Russian government has been on a path toward authoritarianism at home and assertiveness abroad. And Putin himself has been pretty clear that he believes he's rebuilding Russian influence in the world. He's making Russia the great power that it once was. Unfortunately, it means stepping on the toes of some of our allies. It means, for instance, annexing Crimea. It means threatening the Baltic states. It means flying bomber runs down the coast of Sweden. So what the administration will have to see is that there isn't much room for cooperation with Russia, but there is some. And I think that what you saw with Secretary Tillerson when he was in Moscow a little while ago was a willingness to be pretty tough with the Russians and to say to them on the Syrian chemical weapons deal, for instance, you were either incompetent or you weren't telling the truth. And so that kind of straight talk with the Russians will actually gain a measure of respect with Vladimir Putin, who is somebody who admires strength.
And I know that it does appear that Rex Tillerson understands that and is putting his best foot forward in terms of being tough. Yeah. Now, I know you've worked with him in the past. There's a speculation that you were playing a very big role in terms of Donald Trump considering Rex Tillerson as Secretary of State. Was this your idea?
Well, I was one of, I'm sure, many people who brought the name forward because the president needed a different kind of Secretary of State, and Rex Tillerson is a business peer. But he's also an oil man, and oil people know the world. You know this, Maria, from your own work. They know the world like nobody else. They have to make long-tail decisions, long-tail investments in difficult places. They have to work with difficult people. Their employees work in dangerous circumstances. Sort of sounds like being Secretary of State.
Yeah.
And so I thought, and others thought, that Rex would come with the right set of the right background to do this job, and I think he's doing a fine job.
I think it was a great idea, and you're right, because as an oil executive, largest oil company, you've got to deal with some hostile governments. Right. You've got to get past, you know, all of the barriers with which to drill in those countries.
Absolutely.
So you're dealing with, as President Trump would say, a lot of bad hombres.
Yeah, a lot of bad hombres. Yeah. That's right.
So